Welcome to this week's episode. This one is special. This is dedicated to those people who are struggling with symptoms that they have no idea that they're not normal. They think that whatever they're struggling with is normal, or you know there's a problem, but you have no idea where to start, or you've improved, but you haven't gotten quite there yet. Today's topic: histamine intolerance. You excited? I am. I'm Dr. Ben Lynch, and this is the Dirty Genes Podcast. For years, I struggled with histamine intolerance. It's not something that actually goes away forever. It can always come and go, and it depends on what's going on in your life. But if you understand the aggravating factors and you know how to improve them and what's causing them, then you can make decisions and improve it. And I have done so. I struggled a lifetime of high histamine issues. If you read my book, Dirty Genes, I hope you have. And if you haven't, then you will know that my lifetime has been one of high histamine. What are symptoms of histamine intolerance? There's a plethora of them. So it could be nosebleeds, itchy skin, staring at the ceiling at night, not being able to fall asleep. And I can also tend to be irritable. I can get headaches. I can get motion sickness where I'm in the car and I'm reading and I want to be productive. Motion sickness. I can get seasickness, which is a type of motion sickness. So if any of these sound familiar to you, then you're probably experiencing some degree of histamine intolerance. And maybe it's just episodic, meaning it's at that moment and it's first time ever for you. Chronic persistent nosebleeds. For decades, I had nosebleeds where I had to be sidelined. I mean, I'd be playing soccer as a kid, get a nosebleed, I had to sit out. I'd be playing tennis in a tennis match, I'd get a nosebleed. I'd delay the game. How embarrassing is that? So, I'd be sitting in class or a cafeteria as a kid eating some food and or just sitting there and I'd touch my nose. Then I'd get a nosebleed and it was annoying. And I got silver nitrate stuffed up there and it burned and it stopped my nosebleeds for a little while, but you know what? They came back because having my nose cauterized didn't fix it because my high levels of histamine, it just found another weak point in my blood vessels in my nose and started bleeding all over again. So we tend to try to stop these symptoms from happening and we want to make them go away quickly with our antihistamines, with our headache medications or over the counter meds or putting something on our itchy skin after we get bit by bugs and we get this big welt of stuff on our skin because a mosquito bit us or a bee stung us and it's super itchy and we itch so much that we get scabs and bleed. And our middle son Matthew was that way. When we go to Russia in the summer, he get bit by mosquitoes and he would itch horribly. Does that happen to you or your kids or someone you know where you wonder why are they scratching so vehemently from a bug bite? You get bit by mosquito, not a big deal for you at all. You don't get it. But wow, they are scratching nonstop. And why in the heck would they scratch until they bleed? And then they don't even really let it scab over because they keep scratching and they're up all night and you hear them scratching. You're like, please stop. So genetics are different, our environments are different, and the foods we eat are different, and the microbiome is different. So let's define what histamine is first and what it does for you. Histamine is a compound in your body that has a lot of different jobs to do. So histamine supports our ability to focus, to think, to learn, to stay awake, to support our immune system. So our immune system responds when it needs to support wound healing if we get cut or scraped. I fell off the one wheel a couple weeks ago and I'm going 24 miles an hour and I hit the pavement at about 24 miles an hour and I slid about 24 feet. So I've got cuts and scrapes and knee, holes in my knee and my hip and my shoulder are botched and my histamine levels are actually helping me heal right now. Gut. If you have gut issues, maybe you don't have enough histamine. Why? Because histamine stimulates stomach acid. So if you have low stomach acid, might be low histamine in your stomach. Histamine also supports gut motility, meaning it helps move the poop in your digestive system through and out. If you've ever eaten something that has a lot of bad bugs on it, maybe E. coli, then your immune system responds and your histamine levels skyrocket. And then you have explosive diarrhea. Why? Because the histamine helps expel a bunch of stuff out of your digestive tract. So that's really heightened gut motility. And episodic like that or situational like that, it's very useful. So histamine has its pros and its cons. So the cons of histamine leads to histamine intolerance. Histamine intolerance is where your bucket of histamine is so full that any type of trigger, whether it's food or environmental or stress, is going to be spilling over your histamine levels and then leading to problems. So imagine you have a cup, an 8-ounce cup, and you fill it with water and you fill it to the very, very brim. And then you have to walk up a flight of stairs to deliver it. If that cup of water is sitting right there on your desk, it's full of water, i.e., histamine, it's fine. But as soon as that cup has to go and do something else, it can start spilling over. So you start going upstairs, starts spilling over, and it starts going down again, you're fine. Okay. So it's basically just think of histamine as a bucket in your life. And histamine intolerance is when your bucket of histamine is too high. What fills up your bucket of histamine? Good question. What fills up your bucket of histamine? Stress, persistent irritability, high levels of neurotransmitters in your brain, basically. So if you have high levels of neurotransmitters in your brain, that stimulates actually the release of histamine. We have a huge amount of histamine in our brains. Have you ever looked at the back of a package of common over-the-counter antihistamines, and it says right there in the big warning label, caution, taking this medication may induce drowsiness, do not operate heavy machinery? Well, yeah, it's because histamine binds to those same receptors in your as the medication does, but the medication blocks your histamine from binding to that receptor, so you don't get the allergy response, but you also get tired because, well, histamine needs to bind to that receptor to keep you focused and alert. So it's a huge issue. Other causes of histamine intolerance are microbiome. So if your microbiome has a compound, has a bug in there called blastocystis hominis, which is actually pervasive, they're actually thinking that blastocystis hominis is a bacteria that is no longer pathogenic because it's everywhere. It's in your drinking water, it's in your food, it's easily passed from person to person if you share utensils and so on. But blastocystis hominis produces a lot of histamine. It's a high histamine producing bacteria and it's common in the population. Why? I don't know. I had it. I tested it. I did a digestive stool test. I had it. My wife had it. Our kids had it. Everybody had it. I finally got rid of it. And my wife did another stool test and hers is still persisting. Maybe she got rid of it and then it came back. I'm not sure, but you've got to be working on certain probiotics to get that in check. Because if you have high levels of histamine producing bacteria like blastocystis hominis in your digestive system, what's happening is you're absorbing that histamine through the gut into your blood, which then gets to your brain and into your skin, and you start having histamine related symptoms. You can get the irritability, you can get the nosebleeds, you can go underneath the couch and grab the lost remote that kids, dropped under there, or you're cleaning it up and there's a bunch of dust bunnies, and now you're getting all these red dots on your skin. That's the high histamine, and you're being aggravated because why? Because of the gut imbalance of the blastocystis hominis. Or perhaps you switched, listen into this, folks, because this happened to me, is you bought a probiotic that you thought was really good for you. Multi-strain, God, it was expensive. And a lot of reviews are just amazing. And so you started taking it for the first few days, maybe even a week, maybe even 2 weeks, and your digestive system was working well. The stools are nice and thick because the more probiotics that you take, sometimes it increases the bulkness of your stool, which is great because the stretch receptors in your rectum, when they get stretched out, it signifies that, oh, it signals that you need to go take a poop, and you actually go poop. But if you drop that nice full poop in the toilet, that's satisfying, right? So that could be from good microbiome, healthy microbiome. But if you're taking probiotics that are increasing histamine too much, then you're going to get histamine intolerance. Again, there's that ebb and flow. If you get too much histamine, then you're going to start absorbing it and getting those problems. And so for me, I started becoming more irritable. I started having these weird head pains, like a headache, but not really a headache. And I would be staring at the ceiling at night, not falling asleep very easily. And I just was not feeling good. I was felt even a bit more dizzy. And I was like thinking back, what changed? What changed? What changed? And what changed was I switched to this probiotic. And this probiotic was new for me. And I've been taking it for maybe a month or two. And it was about 50 to 100 billion strains. Sometimes I take 200 billion because, hey, more is better, right? And so I stopped taking it. I started feeling better. And then a year or two go by, I figure out why did I feel better. I looked at this, I figured out which strains increase histamine production in the gut, and that's Lactobacillus rhamnos or Lactobacillus bulgaricus, Lactobacillus fermentum, and Lactobacillus casei. So the Lactobacillus, not all of them, but these three specifically, and possibly others as well, increase histamine by quite a bit. So if you are taking a probiotic with these three, again, Lactobacillus bulgaricus, fermentum, and casei, if you are supplementing with these three and you are experiencing histamine intolerance, then I highly recommend that you stop taking them. If they are highly recommended by your health professional or a health professional prescribed them for you, go talk with them. So I formulated Probiota Histaminics in order to help those who have higher histamine levels in their digestive system, because Probiota Histaminics is designed to support healthy levels of histamine in your digestive system. And so it helps balance that. So when you are consuming specific strains of histamine that help modulate histamine or break down histamine or don't produce histamine, then whatever strains that are producing histamine, it should be supported. So Probiota Histaminics is what I've been using for the most part in my family for years, and it's been an amazing change. So those are a few things. So gut is a big one. Food and drink is another. So if you're eating a lot of citrus or fermented foods like kombucha or aged meats or cheeses that are aged, or alcohol, that's another big one. These are all offending factors for increasing histamine. So especially if your bucket is full. So you got to remove those, at least for the time being, if you're experiencing histamine intolerance. Another one is estrogen. Ladies, histamine is a big problem for you, and men as well. So men, if you have higher levels of estrogen, which is possible, I do at times because my genetics for metabolizing estrogen are not very good either, very slow at it. So if your estrogen levels are elevated, that also increases the release of histamine. And so that is not good long term. And so if you have additional weight around your middle, you're a bit, your BMI is higher, or you just have higher estrogen levels because you can't get rid of estrogen, then you need to be working with your health professional to help lower your estrogen levels. Exercise. If you ever exercised and you've had a really red face, so a brilliant red face can be associated with high histamine levels. So if you exercise and you've had a red face for 20 minutes and then it goes away, that's probably typical. That's a healthy histamine response and you're good. But if you've exercised and your red face stays there for an hour, 2 hours, and you stay flushed, or you're on the treadmill and someone on the treadmill next to you is like, wow, Ben, what is up with your face? You look like a beet. You are so red. That's probably something to be listening to, because if you have that red of a face, that's probably too high of histamine. So exercise can induce that, and exercise also increases histamine for various reasons. So histamine intolerance is aggravated and worsened by those common issues. Now, let's look at some other factors here too. Let's look at some genetic factors. So I did my strategy genetic test. And so I'm now looking at the histamine pathway, and a particular genetic variation, which I have, is in the H1 receptor. And the histamine receptor, H1 receptor for all of us, is in our brain. And it's very useful for, again, learning and increased alertness and what have you. But I have a lot of histamine receptors in my brain. And I also have them very sensitive. And so this particular genetic variation is associated with increased susceptibility to motion sickness, seasickness, motion sickness, car sickness, any type of motion, merry-go-rounds. I could never do those as a kid. Ferris wheels, couldn't do them. My friends at school and at carnivals are like, oh, let's do this ride. I'm like, oh, no, I'm good. Or I would not be good and I would be vomiting profusely because what's vomiting? High levels of histamine, serotonin too, but high levels of histamine is associated with vomiting. So nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, histamine. So it's this particular genetic variant is pretty common. And so knowing that has made me feel, well, A, more aware, and B, not like I'm a wimp. Now that I know that I have increased susceptibility to motion sickness, well, I do things to help prevent that. So if I'm going to go on someone's boat, I'm going to be working on ways to reduce my histamine bucket. I'm not going to have my bucket so full because when I go out there, I'm going to get more histamine and I'm going to get seasick. So now I can go out on a boat most often, knock on wood, and not get seasick. Why? Because I know how to handle it. I'm going to be giving you these pointers here in a moment. But first, I need to share all the things that can be associated with histamine intolerance, including genetics. So you've got to be changing your diet. So, and if you have another genetic variation in this gene called DAO, this DAO gene increases your susceptibility to histamine foods, drinks, and histamine produced in your microbiome. Why? Because the job of DAO is to process histamine, period. And in the gut, in the digestive system. And DAO is also found, ladies, in the placenta. And so if you are experiencing pregnancy complications or nausea and vomiting of pregnancy, then that could be because your placenta is not making DAO very well, or you're not making DAO very well, or your DAO gene is dirty, and you need to read the chapter DAO in the book, Dirty Genes. Highly recommended because this is a big time dirty gene for people. And so my genetics, I have a few genetic variations in my DAO gene, which actually make me more susceptible to histamine. So DAO is a big one. And I had a person comment the other day. It's like, Dr. Lynch, I did your strategy and genetic test, and I don't have a DAO genetic variation, but I can't touch histamine containing foods and drinks at all. So since I don't have the DAO variation according to Stratagene, then I guess I shouldn't be taking your DAO enzyme found in histamine block, should I? It's not really indicated for me. And I was like, wow, this is such a common problem. Listen, folks, if you do a genetic test and you do not have a genetic variation in any particular gene, that does not mean that the particular gene is not causing a problem for you. So many people think that they're scot-free because there's no variation in that particular gene, but they've completely disregarded epigenetics, completely. The DAO enzyme that is working to eliminate your histamine from food and drink in the microbiome gets easily dirtied. Other things, acetaldehyde, which is produced from alcohol. Alcohol turns into acetaldehyde, and then that also dirties your DAO enzyme. So just by you drinking alcohol is going to increase your histamine intolerance. So the dirtier your DAO gene is, the more susceptible to histamine intolerance you are. So let's say you don't have a genetic variation in your DAO, but you are taking metformin and you have yeast overgrowth in your gut. You have candida because candida produce acetaldehyde themselves, which is how a lot of alcohol is made, right? From yeast. So alcohol turns into acetaldehyde. Yeast produce acetaldehyde. Possibly you're taking metformin, and also gut not being healthy. Maybe you have leaky gut. That also contributes to dirty DAO. And the nutrient needed for your DAO enzyme is copper. And so if you have insufficient copper, because maybe you're taking a bunch of zinc and now your copper levels are low, well, then your DAO enzyme won't work either. So regardless if you have a genetic variation or not, your DAO enzyme can be very, very dirty. So my wife, lots of gut problems, lots. Her DAO enzyme, spotless in terms of genetics. She has no genetic variation in her DAO enzyme at all. But, she's got way more gut problems than I do. But possibly because she still has the blastocystis hominis in there, which she needs to help get rid of. And mine's gone. At least I need to check again, but I think it's gone because I've been doing very well lately. Knock on wood, can easily come back. Another particular gene is called HNMT. HNMT is a gene, its primary job is to get rid of histamine in the brain and the uterus, in your skin, in your liver. So if you have a genetic variation in this HNMT gene, then perhaps you are more prone to eczema, psoriasis, itchy skin, bug bite, swelling, and it's going to be a problem for you. So does that mean, though, if you don't have a genetic variation in your HNMT, that you're fine, that you're not going to have those things? So it must be something else? No, because that HNMT gene can get dirty from other things. What? Bad methylation. You and I have talked about methylation a lot. So if you've got an MTHFR genetic variation, your HNMT gene won't work very well. If you have low glutathione, your HNMT gene won't work very well. If you have high homocysteine, low B12, low folate, low B6, all these things will contribute to a potentially slower, more sluggish HNMT, regardless if you have a genetic variation in there or not. I do not have a genetic variation in my HNMT gene. I don't. But my methylation cycle isn't so good. Well, why does that matter? Because the HNMT gene uses methylation in order to function. Now, there's other genes as well. There's MAO-A, monoamine oxidase, and monoamine oxidase A and B. These genes are really important to process histamine as well, but in a different type of histamine. It's called N-methylhistamine, because HNMT will take your histamine and it will methylate it, right? So HNMT uses SAMe to methylate histamine. It makes N-methylhistamine, and then the monoamine oxidase genes will then process that and turn it into a different type of compound, which then another gene will have to process it, called aldehyde dehydrogenase, and it will get rid of it, and then you'll eventually pee out your histamine. I got better. My histamine pathway sucks in terms of eliminating histamine, but once I get it dialed in, I'm great. So that's the genetic side of it. Now, how do you support it? I mentioned a lot of things already. Lack of sleep. You gotta sleep better, but that's a vicious cycle because histamine doesn't really help you sleep. So you gotta know that, but then, just not purposely stay up till 2 a.m. So maybe start changing your lifestyle habits and maybe not drink in the evening, because drinking increases your histamine levels. So don't drink in the evenings. Don't stay up till all hours watching Netflix. Go to bed earlier. Yeah, you might be staring at the ceiling for another hour, but at least you're staring at the ceiling from 11 to midnight instead of 2 to 3 or 1 to 2. So those are some changes you can be doing. If you're exercising, exercise earlier in the day instead of in the evening. Why? Because exercise increases histamine. If you are exercising in the evening and you get more alert, more focused, more attentive, then you're not going to be able to fall asleep. I used to play soccer on a rec team, and we call it the old man's league, 40 and over. I loved it, but games were at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, even an indoor, and I come home wired, all amped up, my adrenaline, my histamine levels, and I couldn't fall asleep literally until 1 a.m, and I'd be wrecked for the next 3 days. But I thought I was doing myself good because I'm exercising and I'm playing soccer and I'm hanging out with people and the social aspect, and it's fun, but it wrecked my sleep. My histamine levels were getting through the roof. I stopped. So I want to play soccer again, but not like that. You got to be looking for underlying bugs. If you have yeast overgrowth in your gut, you got to clean that up. And if you are, having oxidized fatty acids, that's going to be slowing down your ALDH gene. So oxidized fatty acids, where do you get that? When you cook. Here you are cooking more at home, but you're cooking with olive oil, or you're cooking with sunflower oil, or you're cooking with almond oil, or whatever. And some of these oils do not have good smoke points, meaning that they get easily burnt, damaged, and oxidized. And you're inhaling all that. So cook with ghee or avocado oil. These two oils have very, very high smoke points. If you're overweight, you got to be looking on ways to support your weight loss. Okay. Eating at night is a big one. It's not all about exercise. It's just eating whole foods is a huge, huge factor. Now, in terms of supplementation, we just came out with a new supplement, which I'm extremely excited about. It's called Histamine Block Plus. And Histamine Block Plus is using the nutrients found to support every single enzyme in your histamine pathway. So that's what Histamine Block Plus is. It's the DAO enzyme directly. It's the copper, it's the zinc, it's the niacin, it's the SAMe, it's the riboflavin, it's the B5. And it's more than that, because when you're processing the histamine via DAO enzyme, the DAO enzyme is producing hydrogen peroxide and ammonia. And so is the monoamine oxidase genes MAO-A and MAO-B. So here you are eliminating histamine through these genes, but your body is also producing these toxic byproducts of ammonia and hydrogen peroxide. So what did I do? I added components to help metabolize ammonia by adding alpha ketoglutarate and PQQ to support the oxidative stress of the hydrogen peroxide. And so when I put all those together inside 2 capsules, then I tested it for months before we went to market and sent it to the manufacturer to make it. I was impressed with the results. Matthew just did a video of him yesterday of taking the Histamine Block Plus, because we got the capsules in, the official bottles now at Seeking Health. And I gave him 2 capsules because his right nostril was completely plugged. And within 5 minutes, it was 30% improved. So Histamine Block Plus is designed to break down, is designed to support healthy histamine levels by supporting the enzymes that do that. Again, the DAO, the ALDH, the HNMT, the NAT2, the MAO-A, the MAO-B, and that's what Histamine Block Plus, it supports all those enzymes. Another one is called Histaminics. Histaminics supports the body's ability to keep histamine where it needs to be. So if histamine is stored within the mast cell, it doesn't get spat out, then you're not going to have any histamine symptoms, because histamine has to get out of the cell in order to bind to a histamine receptor. If histamine gets out of the cell, binds to the receptor, then and only then will you get histamine symptoms and histamine intolerance. You can have massive amounts of histamine stored inside your cells, and you actually do. And if it stays there, you're good. If it leaks out or gets stimulated to get out, then you're going to get histamine symptoms. And so combining Histamine Block Plus with the histaminics is going to be more comprehensive support, because you're supporting the storage of histamine, the healthy storage of histamine, and you're supporting the healthy histamine levels with the Histamine Block Plus. Now you got to hit the gut. You've got to support healthy histamine levels inside the gut. And that's what comes in the Probiotic Histaminics. So Probiotic Histaminics is a probiotic where I designed that uses specific strains that either help support histamine metabolism, that don't produce histamine at all, or help modulate histamine in the gut. So it works on different levels. So, but probiotic histaminics have been very, very supportive for a lot of people. So you got to have a more comprehensive approach. You got to support the storage, you got to support the gut, and you got to support the metabolism of histamine. And another factor would be vitamin C. So vitamin C also really supports cell membranes, and liposomal delivery of vitamin C supports the absorption of vitamin C. The liposomes are made from phosphatidylcholine, And phosphatidylcholine is a primary component of your cell membrane. So when you take a liposomal vitamin C, not only are you getting the vitamin C to help stabilize a mast cell, which then keeps the histamine inside the mast cell, but you're also getting the phosphatidylcholine to support the cell membrane of the cell, which then keeps it stronger and less leaky. Do you need all of them? It all depends on your situation. I would start with one and see how you go. Probiotic histaminics would probably be the first one because the gut is always a huge, huge factor for people. So probiotic histaminics has been one of our top sellers for years now, and we're a big user of it in our home. I would start there. If you're still struggling, I would be adding in the Histamine Block Plus. Then I would be looking at things like optimal adrenal and lithium orotate because that helps, balance your moods in a very calming, supportive way. And if you're struggling with higher levels of estrogen, then you should be looking at DIM plus I3C because DIM and I3C support estrogen metabolism, and calcium D-glucarate also supports estrogen metabolism and liver nutrients as well as seeing health. So I hope that serves you. That was a lot to discuss, but the histamine intolerance is a lot, and it's a complicated journey, but it can be less complicated if you have a map in front of you like I do. So once again, don't forget the coupon code for you Dirty Genes podcast listeners. Much appreciated for your support. Again, is SG25 off. So for SG25OFF to save $25 off your Strategene kit. Again, you can buy one and get 25 off, or you can, say if you have 2 or 3 or 4 people in your family, you get $25 off each Strategene genetic test, which is an amazing deal. I don't know if we've had that deal yet before. So I want to thank you for your support. And make sure you click subscribe on the show on YouTube or on the podcast platform, whatever you're listening to, and leave a review. I love reading reviews, and be honest with those reviews. If you like certain things about the podcast, please share that. If there's some things that you want to see improved in the podcast, please share that as well. Obviously, I love seeing 5 stars, but I also love constructive criticism as well. So please provide that. And if you can leave comments on certain platforms too, please do so. And until next time on the Dirty Genes podcast, have a great week, and keep your histamine down and less intolerant so you can be thriving and succeeding in life. Take care.